Good evening. Welcome to the Alan Osborne Show. Hey, you can't make this shit up. Fred Tricker was happy I said you couldn't make his crap up, but that too. But it's the 13th of June, and tomorrow's the last day of qualifying. So congratulations to all you people who qualified. We knew Chaz Galloway would pull out. That ain't a surprise. Have you seen what a crazy nut job he's become? Everybody in the county's coming after his hind end. Chaz boy, it's one thing to keep your mouth closed and everybody know you're stupid, but you've opened it up and made sure the whole world knew, not just a few who knew you. So here's to you, Chaz Galloway, swimming with bricks on your legs. So let's catch up on a few things. So I got cut off the other day when I was talking at the BCC, and if you come back to the Indian land grab, as I call it, or the money grab they wanted for their land, I found out some other interesting things. Not only have we figured out that money from BP and the Triumph Fund was channeled to these people, but they called themselves a tribe and an Indian nation in their 501c. Neither of one that is they are. So that alone, but what was disturbing is they've been granted over $500,000 of grants to do things that they admitted cost over $1 million. So these people didn't have the money to finish it, and they didn't spend the money they got, and they didn't create any ecotourism. There's no tilapia, there's no hydroponics. Hell, there's no power on the greenhouse they built. They just blew a bunch of money. Where's the rest of it? And when they started asking for accountability, they said, "Oh, we got receipts." Hell, anybody make up some receipts. That thing smelled to high heaven and never seen so much. And it was funny they didn't bring it back up. You know why? Because Tony and Danny didn't want it brought back up because it's embarrassing. They're both involved in it. Imagine that. I got some call from several listeners, and what surprised me was to find out that there's people saying that the city of Freeport somehow has loaned this Indian group in Bruce over $2 million. Now I don't know the status of it or how it was borrowed and what name, but evidently it hadn't all been paid back, and I've asked for some information on that. So we're going to see if you're in Freeport or you're in Freeport government and you know that the stands with a sandwich woman out there, Ann Tucker or whatever her name, if you know that group has applied and borrowed money from the city of Freeport or through the county, can you provide the Alan Osborne Show that information or tell me where to send the public records request, and we'll verify that. But it's time somebody looked into this mess, and Anderson and Glidewell's name, like I said, this is an unrecognized tribe, unrecognized by an Indian nation, and yet Glidewell's got them on the county site as the Indian historian people. You can't make that kind of stupid stuff up. And speaking of Glidewell, attention, attention, attention. There's another lawsuit come out from an employee, and guess whose name's in the middle of it? Glidewell, Cornman, Barker. You can't make this shit up. So, yeah, it's just coming around, folks. You see what kind of leadership with your tax money? And without that, we're going to get into that. But before we get back into the Liedwell stuff, so we've talked about some of the other issues going on here, and where'd all the money go to the Indian grant? Where's the tilapia? Where's the hydroponics? Where's the ecotourism? Where's Waldo? Anyway, and so another issue going on right now is, like I said, tomorrow's the end of the qualifying day, and the Alan Osborne, I'm in the sheriff's race. I'll be in the November, but now we've got Fatkins, having to run heads up against a real cop. All right, in the primary. And this guy's got a good record. All you guys who've out there saying Mike's such a good sheriff, invite me to a debate, and I'll bring up some things that Mike's been involved in, and we'll just see what Mike has to say about them in real time. Mikey, I got all the goods on you. We're going to go over Corey and old Panty Sniffer Voss. Did you know that the sheriff had somebody convicted of sexual harassment, and their punishment was promotion. You can't make that shit up, can you? We don't deserve that kind of government. We don't deserve to have Mikey's buddy Corey Godwin, who hadn't had nothing to do with law enforcement in 15 years, to suddenly be put in front of the jail for a short period of time in charge of real cops, and then Mikey gets him a job at the state. Mikey fires his wife for credit card abuse, and people, the listeners, or some kind of misstep with his money, and now Mr. Godwin's wife's back at the sheriff's office as employee of the year. How many people get left go from a government job for misconduct with a credit card to arrive right back in the same office as employee of the year? And isn't it strange that rumor of she was coming back when Mikey let her go just for show, all that came back? Imagine that. The full circle of bullshit in Walton County. And in the sheriff's race, I'm ready to talk about it. I'm ready to talk about these issues. Let's talk about Mikey's budget. Let's talk about why can't firefighters be in charge of firefighters and paramedics? Mikey's supposed to be the boss of the cops. It looked like he's empire building. He's got a PIO section that does nothing but make Mikey look good. And it's a bunch of bullshit. Hey, Mikey, what you doing with your legislative aid or is it your person up there, one of your lobbyists or whatever? You doing something with that too? Well, we're going to talk about the sheriff's race. And I hope I hope Mike Atkins won't run from this Murray guy. Are you going to run, Mikey? Are you going to dodge? Are you going to give him all the documents? Are you going to give him a budget? Are you going to have time to debate? Or are you going to say you're too busy dealing with shark bites? Or are you too busy covering up all the sexual misconduct in the sheriff's department? Are you busy doing that? Or are you trying to get somebody else's job at the state? So be that as it may, welcome to the sheriff's race, Mr. Murray. I welcome somebody else who's not a liar. Now there's two of us in the race that aren't liars, maybe. That's a good thing. I can't wait for it. And we're going to see how this shakes out. But can you believe there's another lawsuit coming out? And, I hear there's going to be ethics complaints on Tony and Trey Nick about all the racial text and about hiding the naked women and creating a lie with a county attorney and then lying to the other county attorney. I mean, can you make this kind of stuff up? So be that as it may, we're going to stroll back to the Maxwell suit, and we're going to have a fireside chat again. Yeah, just me and you the listeners, and I'm going to read you some documents in their very order. So we're going to go focus on Mr. Liedwell tonight, and we'll come back to the sheriff's race in a few days after Mikey has time to clean the stains out of his drawers that he's actually going to have to stand up and worry. And let me tell you, he's worried. And he ought to be. And you sorry people like all his little undersheriffs running around kissing his ass, shitting on the public. Come to a BCC and watch the goon show that the sheriff has. Did you know the sheriff passed around lists of people in this county who had not had due process, but somehow they were on the sheriff and the commissioner's list? What's that all about? We're going to read some stuff in upcoming shows and get to that. So now, without further ado, hold on. So here we are with Mr. Historian himself. And by the fireside, hey, Danny, how you doing? Where are your teeth? Anyway, Danny, you'll probably be choking on me. So we're going to talk about your little deposition. So without further ado, we're going to proceed to June 1st, 2023, at a time when Danny felt bulletproof and sat down for a deposition in the Maxwell case. So let's get on with this. Okay, having been duly sworn and certified, this is the deposition of Danny Liedwell in a pending case. It's now 9:15, June 1st, 2023, and a reading from the book of Liedwell. Mr. Glidewell, my name's David Allen Roberts, and I represent the plaintiff in this case. We just get into it, because this is what happened when you go to court. You got to answer questions, and the questions are supposed to be the person who's named to answer. And he asked him, do you understand this is an official proceeding, Mr. Glidewell, and you're under oath to answer truthfully? Glidewell said, yes, sir. Do you understand if you fail to do so, it's perjury? Yes, sir. All right, how are you employed? And we'll get through that. He says, I'm a commissioner. Were you a commissioner when Miss Maxwell got fired? Oh, yeah, I was one. And I'll quote you when I need to on the critical stuff, but I'm just reading through this and trying to get the lawyerese out of it so you know what's going on. And so the lawyer lays in front of Danny a document. He says, all right, let me show you what I marked as Exhibit 1 if you're following along with the information at home. And I'll ask you if you can identify the document, Mr. Glidewell. And it said it would appear to be the interrogatories that were sent to my attorney sometime back. I don't know when. Are you familiar with what the interrogatories are? He asked. And Glidewell says, yes, sir. In a legal proceeding you are? All right, does this appear to be a true and accurate copy of the interrogatories, meaning questions from Mr. Glidewell, served upon you in which you have provided a response? And Glidewell says, yeah, it appears to be. He's sitting there looking at the exhibit. All right, on the last page, is that your notarized signature? Yes, sir. So Danny signed this in front of a notary. So he's admitted this is his document, so now the lawyer's going to talk about it. Let me turn your attention to the third page of this document, says the lawyer. Now, I ask you to look at question 7. Describe in detail any and all meetings, communications, but not limited to Larry Jones, Clay Atkinson, or any other BCC commissioner in which you were present or participated in the plaintiff's, that being Miss Maxwell's, termination or potential termination. Your answer is none. Is that correct, Mr. Glidewell? And he says, yes, sir. Do you maintain that to be true? And Glidewell says, yes, sir. He says, do you know Larry Jones? And he says, yes, sir. And who is Larry Jones? He was the county commissioner. Now, okay, if Mr. Jones testified that he had a meeting with you, Mr. Glidewell, in which plaintiff's termination was discussed, would he be telling the truth? Now, here we go. Here is the good old boy Danny going to get into a good old boy answer. He didn't say Larry lies at first. He says, I think he would have had a misrecollection. So Larry's now misrecollecting, according to Danny. Now, here's what I'll submit to you. I've already read Larry Jones' deposition, and I've read Stan Sunday's deposition and other people's. And guess what? Stan's and Larry's and other people's are consistent. You know whose isn't consistent with what's asked? Danny Glidewell. And he says, and so I just want to put that note out there. So he says, I think, did you have any meetings with Mr. Jones at any time in which Miss Maxwell was discussed? And he said, yes, sir. What was the nature of the meeting? He said, well, we had a regular board meeting every 2 weeks. Generally before the board meeting, we had come back from Orlando, a Florida Association's conference, and Miss Chrisman at the time, or Miss Maxwell, was exhibiting a behavior I didn't think was appropriate for a professional and a professional outing, paid for by the taxpayers. And you know, Danny, why wasn't in this the answer that the lawyer said? Why wasn't there a motion to dismiss? Because you guys had personal knowledge of Miss Maxwell or Christian liquoring it up and flirting around with Trey and Boots. Why didn't y'all answer like that? Was it because y'all had to cover up for Tony? Anyway, I digress. Back to Fireside Chats. We had a regular meeting that was paid for by the taxpayers, is where we're at, drinking and things of that nature. So the next time I met with Mr. Jones, I told him what I'd seen and that some, and then he pauses because he's about to say something he's not allowed to do. He couldn't direct Mr. Jones, that he needed to do with it what he wanted, and that's all I said. Was Mr. Atkinson, meaning Clay, at that meeting? No, sir. Did you ever have a meeting with Clay and Larry in which my client's employment was discussed? Danny says, I don't recollect any such meeting. And if so, Mr. Jones testified that you came to his... So, if Mr. Jones testified that he came to your office and made crystal clear to him that you wanted Mrs. Maxwell terminated, would Mr. Jones be lying? The lawyer had to rephrase it. It was objected to. Danny pauses. No, I would just say Larry doesn't recollect the same way I recollect. That's his real answer in a sworn deposition. When he's challenged that Larry and other people's answer doesn't match his, he says they recollect different from he does. Well, you just said that wasn't true. That never happened. Is that your testimony, Mr. Liedwell? Liedwell says yes. Similarly, question 6. It identifies and describes, detail any involvement you had in the decision to affect the plaintiff's termination. And you said none. Is that truthful? Yes, sir. Okay. So when you went to talk to Mr. Jones, we'll talk about that a little bit more, you just described and mentioned that Miss Maxwell was drinking at a conference in Orlando. Are you suggesting today that that didn't have anything to do with the effectuation or decision involving her termination? Danny's answer is, I had no involvement in that, so I don't really know why they did it, or I don't know. Danny says he doesn't know why they did it. He just knows that he told him that she's drinking, and later on he'll go into details that she's so drunk that's taking her down the hallway. Now, why did we take this lawsuit? Is it because Sugar Booger, Trey, Nick, and her were friends? Is it because Tony and Trey used racial slurs and Miss Maxwell had them over a barrel if somebody didn't pay her some money? And we just run this until the insurance company paid off and then we all made it go away. That's what Alan thinks. But back to the deposition. Danny says, I had no involvement with that. I really don't know why they did it, so I don't know if he did or not. You'll have to ask Mr. Jones. Well, we have, as Danny doesn't know. And Mr. Jones stated unequivocally that you came to him along with Clay Atkinson. Remember Clay Atkinson we hired as an intern and didn't want to be involved in policy or day-to-day business? He's been all in that shit since he got hired. That's Mike Atkinson's brother, because most problems in Walton County had the word Atkinson tied to it, unfortunately. Sorry for you people that carry that name that ain't part of it. And made it crystal clear to him that you wanted Miss Maxwell terminated. And you're saying as we sit here today under oath, Mr. Liedwell, that just never happened. Mr. Taylor, Danny's Liedwell, object. Question you can answer. Danny says, no, it didn't happen. In regards to 6, what was your motivation according to your testimony? Well, why did you talk to when you were talking to Mr. Jones about Miss Maxwell's drinking in Orlando? Did you go to him with that, or did he come to you? We have a practice at a meeting with all these people, Public Works, TDC, Finance, and so he was at my office. It was during that meeting. So, boy, when Danny's convenient, Danny can remember everything. And he remembers that one particular meeting like 8 or 9 months ago. So he's been ready. But do you recall what date is on? I have, no, sir. So Danny says, I have, meaning I've been coached. I have notes. But then he says, no, sir. So it's your testimony that this conversation occurred the Monday before the regular scheduled meeting. And Danny says, before our regular scheduled board meeting, yes, sir, which would have occurred on a Tuesday. Yes, sir. So we know when she got fired, and we just know what Danny said to her. So we know the dates. Now, this lawyer's slick, and he goes, okay, Danny, looking at the calendar, so if Mr. Jones was out of town on that Tuesday on medical treatment, how could he have talked to you about this? Danny says, of course, Danny's a lawyer. Object! There's been no indication what date we're talking about. Well, we just narrowed it down to when we know when it happened. We know when Maxwell's termination. Well, it don't take a rocket science there, county lawyer, to figure it out. Well, so Mr. Jones has testified, and the lawyer goes on to clarify. He was out of town on medical treatment on July 12th, preceding the July 13th board meeting. Dan says, okay, because they're sitting there looking at the dang calendar. So I'm asking you, if you know that that was the date you're suggesting that this conversation took place. Now, suddenly Danny says, I don't know. But these board meetings take place every 2 weeks. Is that right? Danny said, generally. We have special meetings and such, but this wasn't a special. He asked you if it was a BCC meeting. Danny wants to distract. Okay, do you know if there was a regular scheduled board meeting on July 13th? Danny says, I don't know. But why can't you just get out your calendar and look, Danny? That would be something we could ascertain, right, Danny? That's what the lawyer asked him. There's records of that. And Danny said, well, there'd be minutes to that effect. And the lawyer takes him right back to question 6. You answered none to the question whether you had any involvement in the decision or termination. And as you testified, you went to Mr. Jones and informed him about the drinking. So Danny still doesn't get that his answer in sworn interrogatories was he had none. Now, he's already described 2 or 3 things that he actually did. So none was a lie. And Danny goes on to say, it was what I perceived to be conduct that needed to be addressed. Well, Mrs. Maxwell, conduct, why wasn't that in the answers? You know, why'd y'all hide this? This wasn't the first time I had addressed the same problem, although the first time with Mr. Jones. So Danny just admitted that Miss Maxwell's been drinking before and he's been involved before. So why'd you answer none, Danny? And if you didn't tell Mr. Jones, what day-to-day operations were you at? Did you skip your administrator as the chairman and go straight to your HR guy, just like you're not supposed to? So and then Danny stutters, it was just a matter of reporting. I don't have any authority past reporting. Well, who was Maxwell's supervisor, he goes on to say. And he believes that Mr. Atkinson was her immediate supervisor. Did you go to Atkinson and complain about the drinking? No, I didn't. Well, why not? Because Atkinson directly reports to you, Danny. He is one of the few employees, the county attorney, county administrator, report directly to the BCC. Why didn't you go? He goes, no, I didn't. Well, why didn't you? Go to the next page, see what Danny said. Well, pause. We were just into, Atkinson was an interim. And I wasn't sure how that reporting went. So I told Mr. Jones, who was the administrator. And again, what exactly did you tell Mr. Jones, the lawyer says? That Miss Maxwell was drinking and had not went to scheduled meetings of my understanding the county was paying for, and it needed to be addressed. So now more information comes out. Not only did Danny talk to her, but he even told Larry that she didn't go to meetings. He was tracking her. Were you at this conference? Yes, sir. Did you inform that Mr. Jones, that Commissioner McCormick was buying Miss Maxwell drinks? No, sir, I did not. Were you aware of that? No, sir, I wasn't. Did you make any efforts to conduct any type of investigation? No, sir. Why not? Because that's not my job. And the lawyer gets down to it and said, okay, if it's not your job, not your responsibility, why did you feel compelled to tell Mr. Jones? Well, I thought somebody from administration needed to know. Well, okay. But still, we get back to all this information, but Danny had answered in the court records, none. Damn, this is a lot of information for the 4-letter word called none. Anyway, and then Danny wants to expand without being asked, because that's what he does. He keeps talking when he's trying to be guilty, covered up. The county was paying for those conferences, and I had a question whether somebody had approved it. Generally admin. Well, there's another factor. He didn't say that before. He just said she was drunk. Now he says he even questioned why she was there. So why were people going to the conference and spending taxpayers' dollars and they weren't doing what they were supposed to? Well, hell, Danny, that's what happened in Washington with Tony and Trey. Seems to be a systemic problem of some of the BCC. So question, what did you actually observe not doing that you had to go to Mr. Jones? So Danny further explains this answer to none now goes 10 more lines. The county's attorney conference was where I was attending my classes. Some of the other staff mentioned that they had seen the kind of conduct that they and I knew, and that was the second offense, at least for me. And the first time I had seen it directly, so I had reported it to Miss Noyes. Now he's reported it to Miss Noyes and Larry and talked to Clay about it, but he says no, but Clay and Larry says he has. I knew that who at the time, apparently I don't know is what Danny said, what was done about that, but Commissioner Nick and Noyes had to escort her twice to her room because she was so intoxicated she couldn't walk, and that was on the county's dime. Well, Danny, why didn't all y'all answer that in the response to Miss Maxwell's suit that she was flirty, she was drinking, and she was inappropriate? She said that Boots and you guys were inappropriate. Why'd y'all pay her? This don't look good. Because everybody says she's drunk. And then they ask you, okay, this was a conference in Orlando. And then Danny goes on to say the first time was in Washington, D.C. So that puts Danny in the D.C. trip, right? One of them. And she'd been drunk at that one. Who was she with on that D.C. trip? Maybe Sugar Booger. Trey Nick. Let's talk about the second time. He goes, the second time he saw her drunk was in Orlando. Boy, this answer of none is now on page 16. And then Danny remembers the Florida Association of County Attorneys, county's annual conference, not county attorneys. And then he goes on to say, same thing, he asks you. And he said, I had to have my aide help. Who's your aide? Teresa. What exactly in Orlando did you see Miss Maxwell? Well, the only thing I directly saw, my wife was with me, and she pointed out to me that Miss Maxwell hadn't changed clothes in 2 or 3 days. Damn, she was on a binger, wasn't she? On the county dime? Because she had the same outfit on for 3 days. Now, I'll be the first to admit I don't notice things like that, but my wife did. And you don't act like that at a professional conference. You don't say, Danny. Y'all don't follow the rules in anything. That's a good statement. Did you actually see her drinking? No. But did you see her wear the same clothes over multiple days? He says, yeah. And did you see her intoxicated? I don't know if she was intoxicated or not. I didn't get close enough to her. But he goes on to say they had to escort her to her room because she couldn't stand up. Then what the hell is wrong with her, Danny? Danny cannot give a straight answer. Well, if you didn't see her drinking and you didn't see her intoxicated, how'd you go to Larry Jones that she was intoxicated? And he tries to tell her, well, apparently she didn't go to the meetings, and there was a problem with her attire. And you know, I don't know. I just thought he should know about it and should inquire because these trips cost taxpayers a lot of money. And somebody should know about it and talk about it. But that's all I expect. Danny, why didn't you talk about all the people's conduct at a BCC meeting in the public? Because you're not supposed to talk to them like Trey and Tony were texting. You're not supposed to do that. Anyway, what I testified was that I didn't report it to Mr. Jones. I advised him of it. So I guess because there wasn't a formal report, he said, no, I didn't report. It was actually an advisement. And since advisement and reporting are different words, Danny answered no. He didn't report it, just advised him of it. Okay. Mr. Jones works for the board, Danny says, not the other way around. Okay, Danny. I told Mr. Jones what I had seen and heard, and I had heard that she was intoxicated. I mean, that's all I was doing was informing. What he did with it was up to him, but that wasn't a report, according to Danny. And from whom did you hear that Miss Maxwell was intoxicated at Orlando? There were several staff members and commissioners at that conference, so I'm not sure which one. So you don't remember. You never saw you never saw her intoxicated, Miss Maxwell. You never saw Miss Maxwell drinking. You can't remember who you have told she was drinking. But you went to Mr. Jones and informed her that she was wearing the same clothes for multiple days. Do I have that right, Mr. Gladwell? Well, I told Mr. Jones what I had heard, and he goes on to tell the same story different. You said, I think a minute ago, that you were attending a different conference with Mr. Maxwell. No, it was the same conference, but there's a different, it's the same overall conference. But he goes on to explain how it was different. Okay, whatever. Okay, so he talks about what he did. And he wants to know why you took your wife on the trip. And apparently the wives are allowed to ride in government cars on the way there. I don't know what the policy is, but that's what he says. Says she rode, his wife rode with him, the rest of the staff was with him. So the staff, Danny, his wife, building a big family. I assume you all stayed in the hotel rooms, same hotel? Uh-huh. Did you pay personally? Uh-huh. Do you have any alcoholic beverage at the conference? No, sir. So anyway, just some boring stuff we'll get into. Then he said he wanted to go to the Maxwell, the D.C. conference. Now this is different from the D.C. conference that we've talked about before. So here we go again. There were several of the staff. What happened at that concert, they asked Danny. There were several of the staff. Commissioner Nick and Anderson were there. Yep, here we go. And it's not Orlando, it's in D.C. now. And we were just sitting in the lobby after the meetings that day talking. Miss Maxwell came into the lobby and she was obviously intoxicated to the point she couldn't walk hardly. Okay. Well, earlier you said you couldn't tell she was intoxicated. This time you say you can. And Commissioner Anderson told Commissioner Nick to get her to her room. Well, why would Tony tell Nick to do that? Because he knew they were fooling around or something? He knew that she called him sugar booger. Was it maybe Nick was calling her my love at this point? I don't know. But phony Tony tells Nick to go handle the drunk woman. And when Trey got up, Danny said he asked Miss Lowry to go with him. Commissioner Nick first walked her to Commissioner Anderson's aide, Miss Laura. And then they came back down. So Tony can't say he didn't know how this was going. Tony, why didn't you respond and object to the lawsuit? Gosh, Commissioner Anderson had so much knowledge of what had been done wrong. He's in all of it. And they came back down when they did it, then after I guess they took her up to her room, and she came back down to the lobby where we were all sitting. And then sometime later, here comes drunk Miss Maxwell, still impaired. Miss Maxwell came back down, and so Commissioner Nick, she wanted to go to a different hotel that was somewhere across town, a different location where the rest of us were staying. Because apparently, some of them stayed in one hotel, so the rest of them wouldn't see what some were doing. You can't make this up. So the drunk Miss Maxwell wants to go to the other hotel where the party people are, I guess. And Commissioner Nick got her an Uber and took her to the hotel and made sure she got there. And then Commissioner Nick and Miss Lowry came back to the hotel. So we have a commissioner that she doesn't work for. And evidently the county attorney's there. So Nick has the drunk woman, which is a common thing. Did you ever have to escort Miss Maxwell to her room? Danny says, because his wife wouldn't let him. And that conference was in Washington? Yeah, it was prior to COVID. Danny remembers all the details of it now. Probably 2020, late probably sometime in 2020. Like I said, Mrs. Noyes was the county attorney. The same thing I told Mr. Jones. So Sydney knew all about this, and we've read her and Sydney's text because Maxwell concocts a lie with Nick and tells Sydney. Okay, so he goes back to him. So we've only been through 2 questions. So go to question 8. Describe in detail. Let me ask you. He asked him to come back there again. You answer me, and you contend that that answer is truthful, that you did not do any of this stuff. And Danny says that answer is truthful. And he goes back to him again. So, okay, if Larry Jones, and well, I'm going to represent to you that Larry Jones testified that he was crystal clear that you were directing him to get rid of Miss Maxwell. So Danny's the one that fired her. Told Larry to fire her. Would he be lying? And Mr. Terry, Danny's attorney, wants to object, and Danny gets mad and says, "Oh, I can answer." Mr. Terry said, "Absolutely. I would say he's mistaken." So we have a misrecollection, and Larry's mistaken. And yeah, I told him all these things, but my talk to him was none. I mean, you can't make this up. Do you have an opinion or a belief? Oh, I have an opinion. Because and he said, "Could you share it with me?" And Danny says, "Because Mr. Jones and I don't see eye to eye on a lot of things politically. And we still don't. So you think Mr. Jones is trying to harm you in some way?" And he says, "That's one way to look at it." So that ought to make you feel good how the county works. The county administrator and this guy think each other this guy says the administrator is trying to harm him. And he said, "We have different opinions politically." Okay, he goes on to talk about all the customary use and pending litigation and why him and Larry don't get along. And he said, "My opinion on customary use of Mr. Jones diverged. My opinion on how we should proceed and his was different." He said, "What do you mean?" He means the litigation. Pending litigation? He said, "Yeah." So he goes on and says, basically, him and Larry don't get along over CU. And he asked him again, "Did you meet with him?" And he said, so he's just asking Danny the same question, different way, and Danny's answers are changed. He said, "You didn't meet anything with Mr. Jones in his office?" And the guy says, and he goes, "We met at my office," Danny says. He said, "Okay, if there were testimony in this case that at or about the time Mr. Jones claimed you instructed him to terminate with Miss Maxwell, if someone testified that you went to his office and made that demand, that would not be true, correct? Someone other than Mr. Jones." And Danny says, that didn't happen. It would be a mistaken is what he says that happened. Okay, while we're getting this together, do you know that why Miss Maxwell was terminated? There's a lot to this, a lot of alleged reasons, he says. Anyway, we're going to get on to some other stuff. I'll go through my notes. So basically, this is how Danny's thing starts out, and it's horrible. I'll be glad to post this. Anyway, so let's see here, get in here. I want to get into some of the better stuff here. Pause just a second. So Danny starts to tell him how the commission works, like this lawyer don't know. And then he says he doesn't know. He's already told him when he learned of her termination. And so he asked him again at the end, "When did you first learn Miss Maxwell's termination or potential termination?" Again, now he after telling us all that, now he doesn't know. We've already went over the dates. Anyway, let's get on there. Let's take a pause. And then here comes Roy Cornman, which we know is Tony Cornball. And do you know who Mr. Cornman is, Mr. Liedwell? He's the interim county administrator. And when did he become the interim? Well, sometime at the meeting last night. He'd been there 15 months, so I'm assuming. About the first of the year. So now we got interim Tony Cornball. And would you agree all the events are subject of this lawsuit occurred before Mr. Cornman took that job. And he says, right? And Danny said, yes, sir. So was Mr. Cornman around during all these events? He asked Danny. And to the best of my knowledge, he was at code compliance and at the time. So he wouldn't have had knowledge of any of the circumstances of admin. You said you read the complaint. Mr. Cornman would not have had knowledge of the facts and circumstances involving this case. And Danny paused. I don't know, says Danny. I don't have any idea what Mr. Cornman. And then the attorney, because Danny's trying to get out of it, points out, but he was director at this point in time. At that point, he was director of code, correct? He's called code compliance. Well, okay, code compliance. He was physically officed. At the time he was director, I believe his office was located north of the South Walton County Annex. So when he was a director of code compliance, did you have fairly regular interaction? Yep. Other than public works, probably the most. Code compliance gets a lot of citizen complaints. But basically, Tony's answering in this lawsuit, and Tony wasn't in a position or job to really know it. So he lets him explain all that. And he gets on. So he goes into all the things that Cornman does. Okay, and so after Danny pontificates like Clay, he says, but code compliance people, they don't have anything to do with county administration, right? No, sir. The code compliance director reports to the county administrator, and that's as far as I know. That's as far as it goes. So Tony was not in a position. So he said, all right, I'm going to take you back to the document. And it says that we asked the commission, you, Danny, to identify each individual who may participate in review or who has been involved in the decision to terminate the plaintiff separately for each role. And the answer was Clay Atkinson and Larry Jones. Do you believe that there were other people involved in that decision? Danny says, I don't have any idea, although he just described Cornman and himself. Well, let me ask you this. When's the first time you saw this document? Danny says, just a minute ago. Okay. So I assume then that no one interviewed you or asked you questions regarding the responses to this document. Is that correct? He said, to the best of my recollection, nobody asked me. Oh, I'm sorry. Just to help you out, I don't remember ever being consulted and never saw it before today, to my knowledge. Well, wouldn't you agree, Commissioner Liedwell, that if the Board of County Commissioners is responding to interrogatories, it would be important to get input from the commissioners? And you know what Danny says? I don't think so. No, sir. So Danny just said it's not important if a court ordered interrogatories to a commissioner. It's not important if the commissioner gets asked by the paralegals and lawyers if what they said is right or getting input from them. And he said, okay, and Danny goes on to pontificate. We're sued a lot. Most of the time we don't even know about it. So citizens, when they get sued, Danny says it's so laissez-faire that he doesn't even know about it sometimes. And in this case, the first time he's ever even read the documents is sitting at a deposition. Boy, he's all over it. He's oh, you can't make this up. He goes, okay, I know a lot more this year because I'm the chair. I'm finding out a lot more. So if I understood your answer, you don't think if the Board of County Commissioners, this is key, is sued, you don't think the questions are asked regarding commissioner activity, you don't think it's important that the commissioners be consulted regarding their responses to the interrogatories? I don't really understand what you're asking me, Danny, says Danny. So the lawyer says, well, I'm asking you if you testify. I'm asking you. You testify pretty clearly that you were not consulted. You're a commissioner of the county, correct? And Danny nods his head, the deposition says. And you understand that these interrogatories directed to the commission, which is the defendant in this lawsuit, I'm just trying to, what I'm asking you, do you feel like it's important that commissioners be consulted regarding responses to the interrogatories concerning the commissioners? And Danny's confused. I'm not sure it's necessary. Meaning anybody could answer for the commission without answering the commissioners. Does that pass the smell test? It damn sure don't pass the common sense test. It passes the corruption test, where we're just paying lawyers to answer, and the BCC doesn't even have to worry about if something's been done wrong because they're not even reading the lawsuits. I mean, if they know how the staff can fill it out and have the requisite knowledge, I don't see why I need to know about it. Like I said, we get sued a lot. Well, how would the requisite staff know what the commissioners know? They're not with the commissioners all the time. So who's Paige Early? She works in the legal department, says Danny. Okay, she's not a commissioner. She's not a staff person for any of the commissioners, correct? No, sir. She's an employee. She's assigned to legal services, said Danny. And the same thing with Kim Williams. She's not a staff member of the commissioners, correct? No, sir. Also assigned to legal. See, this all goes to Clay Atkinson. Okay, and Nathan Kirby, he's the director of human resources, correct? Yes, sir. Does he still maintain that? And he's not a staff member of the commissioners, correct? Well, I mean, he's an employee of the board, but he doesn't particularly work for any commissioner. He works for administration. Okay. So only 3 people. So it takes Danny right back. If you don't mind, these things have a tendency to go all out of whack when we go back and refer to them so you can identify the document. Well, I'll represent to you there's 2 defendants, 2 non-individual defendants in the case, one being the county and one being the Board of County Commissioners. Okay. I just want to ask you to identify these people. And the answer that was provided by is Clay Atkinson and Larry Jones. Do you think that's an accurate answer, that that's who answered? To the best of my knowledge. So now let me flip to the BCC's response. So this is Danny's response. Excuse me for slouching. I'm trying to read this other thing. And we finally get to Exhibit 2. He asked the commissioner to identify each individual. And the response we got for the county was, please see attached. No, sir. Can you identify each individual who made a recommendation as to whether the employment of the plaintiff should be terminated? No, sir, other than what it says in 8. But there again, this is the first time I've ever seen any of this. So if it's the first time he's seen it, how in the hell could he have ever answered, and who verified his answer? So you don't have any independent knowledge? No, sir. All right, Commissioner. Let's go to Exhibit 4. It's an EEOC complaint. This just goes on and on. He goes to informant of this, and Danny said he's never read that either. So let me get on to some other. Let me pause right there just a second. Okay, we pick back up in Danny's deposition where the lawyer asked him about the text messages from D.C. between him and Tony Anderson. It says, I'm asking you this question. There's a statement submitted on behalf of the county commission, which you are a member and now the chair. But in this paragraph, the 5th one down says, following her separation, Atkinson did become aware of what appeared to be inappropriate text messages Maxwell received from another county official. Well, that was Boots and Trey and all of them. But at no time did that decision to proceed with Maxwell's termination was Atkinson aware of the nature of such messages. Bullshit. They knew Boots had sent those. Everybody knew about it. Let's see here. Anyway, Atkinson was aware of it. And that's what Danny testifies to. So we'll pause and go to the second page. I know this is a long show, folks, but you got to lay out what these people knew, and the only way you can do is go through this. So, page 69, volume 2 of Danny's definition, he gets asked. He says, Mr. Jones, are you aware Mr. Jones testified unequivocally that he was instructed to terminate Miss Maxwell at yourself and Commissioner Barker, which is Danny's love child, birth brother, I don't know, direction, that the instructions from you and Barker came in a meeting that was also attended by Mr. Atkinson. Mr. Jones testified that he couldn't remember if you and Commissioner Barker and Mr. Atkinson all met at one time or whether you and Commissioner Barker were separated. But what he did testify unequivocally is that it was clear as a bell to him that you were and Commissioner Barker were instructing him to terminate Miss Maxwell. First of all, Mr. Jones is, at best, mistaken. That did not happen. I did not tell him to do such a thing. And furthermore, Mr. Jones has been an administrator long enough and a commissioner to know that two commissioners can't tell him to make you a ham sandwich. So Danny knows that they're not supposed to do this, but they do it anyway. Danny says two commissioners are basically worthless. You've got to have three. Mr. Jones sounds like he's trying to cover up his own actions, is what Danny says, that Maxwell getting terminated is his fault. Are you aware that Mr. Jones testified that he also met with you after he met with Commissioner Barker, either together or separately? And you aware that Mr. Jones testified he consulted with Commissioner Nick? So Sugar Booger and My Love, you know those two, Mr. Jones says he talked about this with Nick. You reckon Nick told Larry that he's her sugar booger and she's his love? Are you aware, Commissioner Cornman and Commissioner Anderson, Mr. Jones testified? I do not have. So these are the people that Larry says were aware that she was getting terminated. Nick, McCormick, Anderson, Danny, and Barker, the Fab Five. They all knew. Are you aware that Stan Sunday had testified in this case, Danny says? I was told that yesterday. And are you aware that Stan said the same thing? That Larry said, basically, I'm paraphrasing Danny's answer. I wasn't aware of that. Anyway, so he just goes on and on. Let's go to my notes, the next thing. Let's go to page 84 of the deposition, because this thing's huge. Let's get to that. All right. Would you agree to what Danny says? Let's see here. I'm going to tell you what we're talking about on page 84 of Danny's volume 2. Well, it's talking about inappropriate conduct. I asked you if you had any knowledge of a commissioner dropping off a naked lady at my client's residence. And you objected, saying that he's saying Danny's answer was, when asked about the naked lady, you objected and said that this interrogatory seeks information that is not relevant in the case. So the naked woman passed off to Nick from Lloyd, that was brought to the condo. Miss Maxwell goes over and takes said naked lady and makes up a story to tell Sydney, and all this and Nick and her agree. And none of this is relevant to why Miss Maxwell's suing the county. So I'm asking you now, did you know about the incident prior to reading this in the complaint? And Danny says no, he didn't know about the naked woman. And he said, okay, if you don't know, would you agree it would be inappropriate for a city county commissioner to drop off a naked married female at my client's residence to take care of? Would you agree with that? To be honest with you, what I object to is that the commissioner is named. So Danny's mad that somebody told that the commissioner's name of who was carrying the naked woman. And Danny says, well, the attorney says, well, and Danny says, because it's inappropriate. I don't like the implication. I mean, you, by not naming it, that puts dispersion on all of us. And I don't think it's fair that the commission should be named when a commissioner and another commissioner hand off a naked woman. I don't know. That's just my personal opinion, is what Danny said, that handing the naked woman off and Nick and all that mess with Maxwell, he just said it was inappropriate. Well, if it was inappropriate, why didn't you object and have a motion to dismiss on behalf of the commission and tell them all that? Well, and Danny said it's just his personal opinion. Well, if I tell you that the commissioner referenced there is Commissioner Nick, did you have any knowledge? Danny said, I had no knowledge. Okay, so we talked about it. He said, well, part of our discussion today, he was not on one of the Washington trips, he says. Anyway, maybe that was the one where, no, I can't remember. There's too many naked people and too many drunk people at these legislative conferences. You just can't make this up. Anyway, let's go to the next thing. Let's go to page 84. See what he said on 84. All right. Danny was mad about that. On page 88, Danny's asked, starts at the top bottom of page 77 and says, well, talking about the unnamed commissioner is Nick, and he asked him, I didn't find out about either the naked woman or a lot of this, now Danny claims, until I read them in the complaint. Well, he just said earlier he'd never read them. Did he read them or not? And then why did he say the first he learned of it was today? And then he says, I didn't read about... Danny, your testimony is so inconsistent, it's ridiculous. But he said, this is the first time you've seen these. Well, that's the first time I've seen that. And it sort of irritates me. That we didn't say who it was, he asked. He said, well, that's already irritated me. But that's not right there. And I don't. So what he's showing him is a text about all the black people in Washington. And he asked him, are you aware, looking back on the plaintiff's exhibit 12, there's some back and forth here. The words violation that was for Miss Maxwell, and then it continued that the reference to the monkeys and stuff like you were aware of, is that the first time you knew this? I had never seen any of it until right now, which that's not appropriate behavior for any county employee. And the lawyer says, I understand, and Danny says, period. So right there, Liedwell says, what Maxwell did, what Nick did, what Noyes did, what they all did was inappropriate for any county employee, especially these elected officials and attorneys. And that's what Danny says, line 22, period. And then she said, I understand, I appreciate you said that. Are you aware that some of the information produced by the county, he asked, and that the county are you aware that these documents of text, the county's been in possession of them for some time? Danny says, nope, I'm the chair, but I'm not aware. So that tells you right now that Clay and these attorneys and people are playing cover up the poop in the cat box to the point that they don't even tell the commissioners that they've got text, racial slur text, and text about naked women. I mean, the lawyers are covering up for individual commissioners and not telling the commission, which they are bound to do. And Danny says, I wasn't aware of that. Well, you are now, Danny, and you haven't done anything. It's been over a year. And he asked about these relationships. So let's go to what the next thing is. Danny says. So we're going to go, he's talking about this inappropriate inaction. Let's go to page 95 of volume 2 of his. And let's learn how Danny sees fair hiring and firing. Let's look at that. He's asking Danny about Sidney Noyes, the old county attorney before she quit. Did you have any problem with Noyes? Because remember, Clay and all of them wanted Noyes fired, and Danny did too. Do you believe that she needed to be replaced as the county attorney? And Danny said, well, I had a serious disagreement with Miss Noyes about a particular case. And since that case is ongoing, I'm not going any further. Well, that's the Sandestin case that Danny rolled over with and Sidney lied about. But I'm not going any further. And the lawyer says, okay. But Danny says this. When it comes to personnel, and the county attorney reports directly to the commissioner, it says, I would not have supported termination for her, Miss Noyes, for her misconduct because, and he pauses, he says, I think I have a great deal of respect for members of her family that I wouldn't have done that. I would have hesitated. So he says, screw the personnel manual, screw standards, that if Sidney had done all these things wrong, he would not have supported firing her because he loves her family. Because we all know that DNA in this county is more important than standards, and Danny just said so right here in his deposition. And the lawyer can't believe he's saying. He says, when you say members of her family, does that include the former county attorney, Mark Davis? And Danny jumps on that and says, yeah, we played the same basketball team together in high school, and Mark's daddy was my coach, and he recently passed, and I have a great deal for Coach Davis. And therefore, I would have seriously hesitated, meaning I'm not going to fire this young lady because I played ball with somebody she was related to 30 years ago. Now, there's a Walton County hiring and firing matrix. That's the friends and family program that we talk about. There's two types of rules in Walton County. Those for the elected and connected, and the rules for you, the peon citizen. That's what he's saying. Question, I agree. I almost ran over him the other night at a football game when I was coaching the spring game. I have a great deal of respect for Mark, but I bet that other attorney wouldn't hire and fire based on who he knew. Anyway, and so he goes on to talk about that. Danny said that Danny's son and Mark had a failure to communicate. Anyway, so Danny just sits there and admits. Let's go over some other things before we wrap this up. What else does Danny say that's important here in my notes here? Reading all these depositions and trying to get this bullshit straight. All right. Page 98. He says that when Scott Brannon, let's go to that. He says about the Sidney thing, that him and Mark and all, that they were all lifetime friends, and this is why he wouldn't have supported her termination. How far back does your relationship go with Mr. Atkinson? And he goes, with Clay? Well, I didn't really know Clay until I was till he was a TDC person. And I wasn't really happy with one of the particular things he did. I knew his father I knew well when I was a deputy. I knew Clayton very well and had a great deal of respect for him. I don't know Clay that well. Anyway, he says Clay jacked up the golf garden purchase in short notice. And then let's go on to what he says about Scott's mama. You known Clay for a long time? Yeah, 'cause I've known his daddy. His mama was on the school board, and his mama was Scott Brannon's aide when Scott was a county commissioner. Do you see this friends and family, closer kin, deeper in to the mess? I swear I swear their favorite holiday in Walton County must be Halloween, 'cause they all get to pump kin. Bubba. Anyway, you just can't make it. This shit's ridiculous. That's why I'm running for sheriff. Well, I can't say I've known him through his mother and father. Mr. Atkinson was appointed as an interim attorney on Mrs. Noyes' resignation. Yes, sir. Do you know if she would have resigned? Would she have been terminated? I have no way of knowing that. Well, you got a pretty good idea because you're one of the people who would vote for it, and you said you wouldn't. Anyway, yep, he goes on to that. So let's go to what Danny says about disciplining people. The attorney asked Danny, I see that he says, let's go down the page, and he says, let's see, page 100. And And he said, because I'm a commissioner, is deeply involved with the citizens, sometimes he sends out attaboys. And he said, okay, the lawyer says, talking about how he's involved today to day. I've probably spent 2 attaboys to various directors in the county. Meaning Danny tells his directors in public, in writing, when they're doing a great job. And he gets, okay. And Danny says, go and say that. One of the things I believe in that the aide should be doing is reporting citizen concerns to various complaints. He goes, but Danny says this, I've probably sent 2 attaboys to various directors for everyone, but I don't put uh-ohs in writing. So yes, I think we. Anyway, so Danny just admitted that in the county, in leadership, that if somebody screws up, they only talk about it. They don't put it in writing, text, or anyway. It's not going in people's personnel folder. We know Miss Maxwell worked for the county for almost 4 years and got 1 evaluation. Danny said that wouldn't happen. Was Clay punished for that? No, neither was Sydney. People weren't doing their jobs. Anyway, let's go on to the next thing. Danny's got heartache. And on page 115, right before Stan gets fired and we have to pay him a year, he testified that Larry said that Danny and Barker were after Stan's ass. Danny denies it. Page 122 of the deposition. Let's go see what Danny says there. Okay, we're going to get to that. And folks, I'm about to wrap this up because this night's getting long. And running for sheriff's so hard. It's hard to tell this much truth when you got to read it off the paper, because you can't. I couldn't have wrote this up, and nobody can make the screenplay. So let's get into one of the last things. Talked about the hiring. Commissioner Nick was the only commissioner that had 2 aides, and Commissioner Nick was using Gary Madison, who had to quit for whipping his wife's butt in the parking lot. If y'all have ever seen his picture in his jumpsuit, that's interesting. But that's who they hired to investigate. Danny's not sure how that all came about. But Danny said he wasn't in favor of Commissioner Nick having 2 aides, but he approved it. They all voted for it. They wouldn't let Donna have 2, but they let Nick, because that makes sense. You know, and Mr. Madison was one of those 2. At some point, somebody told sort of long Gary Madison, the HR, to do this investigation, but whether that was Mr. Jones, Mr. Kervin, or Commissioner Nick himself, I don't know. And eventually, folks, Gary Madison writes a report that creates a job for Scott Brannon and Gary himself. And you know something? That's in Teresa Crawford's new lawsuit about how they made up jobs for people. All right. It's almost midnight, and you can't make this stuff up. It just keeps coming out. We're going to get into some more of this on the depositions, but it's clear that the Maxwell lawsuit, it's clear the lawyers aren't telling the commissioners what's going on. It's clear the commissioners don't care to read it, at least some of them, and that the answers being given to the court system have not been verified by the people who have signed them, because Liedwell admits he signed this paper, and a lot of the things on it he'd never seen before. Does that pass the smell test? We can't put up with this. And so after this, we're going to start going over. I'll be reading Trey Nick's new ethics complaint, and I'll be reading Tony Anderson's new ethics complaint just as soon as I get them to them and make sure the requirements of mailing them their copy happen. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about lots of things between now and the primary election in August, and then we're going to talk about them some more all the way up to the day we vote President Trump back in office. And that's the way it was on the Alan Osborne Show, because you can't make this shit up. But you can unelect it. Maybe you could buy it some teeth and some glasses, and it might could call a ball game. That's all I know. But like I said, you can't make it up. Oh, Lucky Chucky Wilder, you're next. I'm ready to go over you. All you people supporting the sheriff, I got some reports to read to you. And we look forward to a wonderful political year out there. Until next time, like I said, You can't get rid of them, but you can unelect them, and then watch them walk off into the sunset, hopefully in handcuffs. You can't make this shit up. Y'all keep them straight. They can't keep themselves straight. Alan Osborne for sheriff. Anybody but Mikey is the chant. Till next time, see you then.